The Soul Winner by Charles Spurgeon will be the book that I'll be reviewing for you today. I'm sure many of you have heard of Charles Spurgeon. If you've ever had to do any kind of research or prepare for a sermon, you're quite aware that he wrote a multitude of sermons. He's a very eloquent preacher, and in his 19th century, he was a reformer. He was an author, and he was a fourth-generation preacher. Charles Spurgeon is known as the Prince of Preachers for a reason. He loved the pastor. He championed their cause. He even started the Pastors' College and Society of Evangelism back in 1855. He started with 21 students there, young pastors, and by the time he had lived his life, he had brought 900 pastors through his college, and they planted over 200 churches there in England. It was his love for the pastor, and it was his obligation to the Great Commission that began to grieve his heart when he heard the preaching that was going on in the late 19th century. He felt like it was time for him to step in. He was going to have to be the guiding force of Reformation in the pulpit in England if it was going to be straightened out. This included even in his own denomination, the Baptist Union, that he found fault in the pulpit. And in 1887, early that year, Spurgeon charged into this Reformation. It was called the Downgrade Controversy. And the main contributor for the need for this Reformation was a liberal German theology that had began to infiltrate and influence the pulpit in England, and the church, including the Baptist Union, was not immune to this. The gospel had become watered down and sometimes not even mentioned in sermons from the pulpit. The sermons began to express a feel-good kind of faith, which made Spurgeon's blood boil. He was outraged. The resulting flood of defections from the faith that resulted from the spiritual decay made him sick. At the heart of the problem was one of the most endeared aspects of Spurgeon's life, and that was the pulpit. Spurgeon said that many churches weren't even having prayer meetings any longer. Their spiritual fervor for God had dwindled down. Congregations were thinning out, and the enthusiasm for the gospel was quickly becoming extinct. So who was chiefly to blame for this decline? Spurgeon believed it was the pastor. It was the preacher. In his efforts to reform the pulpit of England, Spurgeon wrote a series of 6 lectures that he was going to deliver in 1887 to the Pastors' College there, his own school. His hope was to reform the pulpit, that they would embrace the gospel once again and bring it to the people to save their souls. When he started off in these lectures to the young pastors, he told them what soul winning was not, which seems a little bit odd, but if you consider what was going on in the days then, you might be able to associate them to today's times too. You can see why he started out this way. He said what soul winning is not is the stealing of members away from other churches. And he's not just talking about other denominations now. He's even talking about within his own faith in the Baptist Union there in London. He also said that soul winning is not decisionism. And that would be the ingenuine conversions that were going on in the church just to improve their roles and make it look like the church was growing, which meant they were a healthy church and things were great. Spurgeon said that soul winning is to instruct man that he may know the truth of God, to impress him so that he may feel it, and they must be quickened by the Holy Ghost, which must do the work of regeneration. And then he goes on to tell these pastors what it is to be qualified, not just qualified to win souls toward man, but also towards God. He said you have to have just a character of humility. You have to be convicted in your calling and know that you're serving God. You have to have a private spirituality that you give life to your sermons through. And if you could do this towards God as well as just completely surrender your heart to God, He'll use you to win souls. But towards man, they need to see your earnestness. Although there's a boldness in the gospel that also has to be seen, they have to see that love and that heartfelt passion that the pastor has for their lostness. He also spoke about sermons and what kind of sermons win souls. This he spent a lot of time on, and this is where young pastors preparing for the pulpit could really get a sense of what they ought to be doing as opposed to what was happening. He said that you have to aim your sermons at conversion, and that you have to speak on their terms. You know, the people who attended, the lost that attend the church, they want to hear a plain market type of language. They want something that they can absorb into their hearts and they'll retain it. And Spurgeon likened analogies throughout his writings, and Here he used one of a tailor that would take a thread and a needle, and he would sew his fabric and stitch it together, and then he would pull, and if he pulled too hard, the thread would come out. He said you have to put a knot in it. A tailor will put a knot in that thread, he'll weave it in and out, pull it tight, put another knot in it, and it holds, it stays in. That's what the gospel needs to do if you're going to win souls. The thread is the gospel. The fabric is the heart of the lost. If you put a knot in the gospel, it's going to stay there. It's going to hold. It's going to stay in their heart. He said that sermons have to be full of Christ, and they have to appeal to the heart of the lost. And that if you want a sermon that's going to break the heart of the lost, that sermon's first going to have to break your heart. And every sermon ought to be prayed over. Spurgeon also talked about obstacles that they're going to come across. Kind of a forewarning. Look, soul winning's not easy. Here's what you're going to see. You're going to see people that are indifferent. They're lethargic towards the faith. There's social influences of economic recession. They have unbelief. There's a perceived self-righteousness. And some of them just love sin. It's who they run around with. It's their habits. It's their materialism or their worldliness. These are all obstacles you're going to see as you try to win souls, so don't be discouraged. And then he talked about what you can do to get others in your church involved. As a pastor, you got to be patient. And you have to plan in advance that you're going to be doing this all by yourself. Because if you think they're going to join in, you're going to be disappointed pretty quickly. You also have to envelop this culture in your church that goes by your example. Your example is that you've got a passion for the lost, that you want to win souls. If you have that example, that godly example, cultivate that atmosphere in your church. And they too will want to win souls, convert people for the Christ. Spurgeon never attended college, but by no means was he uneducated, and he was not confused in his theology, although there were aspects of both Calvinism and Arminianism in his doctrine, which he even acknowledged himself. But his theology was not prevalently presented here in the Soul Winner, and therefore it doesn't provide difficulties to the reader. But one comment that was somewhat disappointing when I read it was regarding the fact that Spurgeon was not as passionate about winning the souls of unbelievers that he preached to. He did not advocate trying to overcome their unbelief through argument or even propose the possibility of using apologetics in soul winning. Spurgeon said that in order to win infidels, it would be more effective if you were to execute through the power of faith being expressed by a Christian. From researching and reading, his knowledge of the Scriptures were very sound, so it begs the question, it has to be asked, how can an effective evangelist like Spurgeon not engage in apologetics? Spurgeon didn't encourage apologetics, and I am challenged to think the multitude that he could have reached. There's one other difficulty that I found in the book, and that was the presentation and editing. And while the current publisher, Christian Focus Publishing, explains Spurgeon had a plan for publishing the lecture series to be part of the course of work there at the Pastor's College, I don't think that his original publishers, Passmore and Alabaster, fulfilled his desire to have this presented as a textbook. This is primarily due to the inclusion of chapters 7 through 10, where he addressed Sunday school teachers and open-air preachers and friends that gathered at the tabernacle on Monday evenings for prayer meetings. And to further disrupt the flow of the text is the insertion of 5 sermons. And while they're very eloquent, they do tend to not have that structure of progressive thought towards soul winning, but do speak of the task, but maybe from a different approach. In view of those that heard the lectures and sermons back in 1887, they effectively spoke to the common people and the pastors of his day. It touched their lives and it made an impact which created a stir for a return to preaching the gospel according to God's infallible words. And although the book was not published till 1903, 11 years after Spurgeon's death, the nature of the book, being understood as a transcript from the course at the Pastor's College, did in fact have an effect on the hearers of his day. And although they were not readers of the book, and readers of the book today, while they may not know the gist of what Spurgeon was writing to in the context, they can connect to the lectures and benefit from a timeless book that inspires the fulfillment of the Great Commission with a keen perspective on the various aspects that they would encounter in their journey to soul winning. Now, the legacy that Spurgeon left in the world behind him, He affected lives such as D.L. Moody, Ira Sankey. There was Hudson Taylor, the Chinese missionary, the orphanage founder, George Muller, and there was even B.H. Carroll, who we have a debt of gratitude here at Southwestern. But the most enduring aspect of Spurgeon's legacy that continues to bless us even to this day is his timeless sermons that he left us. And when he preached, he never went to the pulpit with more than one piece of paper. He preached at a rate of 140 words a minute for 40 straight minutes. And he preached 10 times a week. It is in these volumes of sermons that we can get a glimpse into the heart of the man who served God with the task of winning souls to the glory of Jesus Christ. I encourage you to read this book. You're going to like it, and I look forward to talking to you on the discussion board.